All right. All right. We'll see if you guys can hear me this time. We're gonna kind of move over. We're having audio problems. All right. We'll see if you guys can hear me this time. We're gonna kind of move over. We're having audio problems. All right, we're gonna have some people migrate. We had some audio problems, and we're kind of just doing a new Google Hangout on air, so we'll get some of their people coming over. Okay, so if you guys want to do just a quick, we had some audio problems, and we're kind of just doing a new Google Hangout on air, so we'll get some there. If you guys want to just introduce yourself again and ask some of your questions. All right, just probably just hear me talking a little bit now. We're just trying to get some of the people migrated from the other page over to this page. So let me know if you hear me, Chris. All right. So good to see you, Sir Robert. I know we had some questions kind of in the previous thread. If people that type questions want to go ahead and type them again, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. For those people that are watching this afterwards, we're going to kind of click some questions and go through all those questions. If you want to submit questions in advance to for the next Google Hangout, please feel free just to post messages directly on the Steinberg or on the Club Cubase YouTube channel. All right, so Robert, yeah, sorry I missed you too. It was fun being in Atlanta. I was just there for a quick day, but hopefully we'll get some more people kind of. And if you guys want to go over to maybe the other side, I just kind of posted a relink. So hopefully people will be able to kind of jump on board from there. But if you guys want to make a comment as well, maybe we get some of the people that ask some questions. So we get started in just a couple minutes. We got a question from Eclipse Sound. What's the topic? It's really just kind of basically just any question that you have. We'll happily go over it. So we'll try to get a couple more people. I'm going to try to message a couple people that were on the other one. I'm seeing some people kind of migrate over. Yep, that was me playing the bass drum, Jake. So if you guys want to ask your questions and please feel free to. If you guys want to maybe go over and we'll see if we get some of the people that were on board. I'll try to send a couple quick messages and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. I think I'm here. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we had a couple questions that were kind of sent in. One of the questions was how to load up, and if as we're kind of doing this, if people want to kind of keep just a little summary of the questions and topics, be happy to kind of post that with the videos afterwards so people can jump to a specific question. First question we had was someone wanting to load up different sounds in Groove Agent 4 very quickly. So we'll go ahead and take a look at how to do that. So if you haven't, we covered Groove Agent 4 in some of the other tutorials, but if I wanted to, we'll just kind of come right over here. And we'll just load up a beat agent. So if I wanted to have my beat agent set up here, we'll just kind of, let me just load up this track configuration. Just gonna make sure that this is muted here so we don't hear inadvertent tracks. So we'll go to our beat agent, and let's say if we have a particular patch here. So let's say if I wanted to replace that hand clap here with kind of different samples as we were kind of playing and auditioning. So I could actually just simply select that one particular sound here, and then we could go into our browser page. And as we do this, we could actually choose samples from anywhere on your hard drive. So if I wanted to just kind of scroll up and down, we could say, okay, I wanted to look at my sounds in Groove Agent or VST sound. So at this point, you could actually just literally just say, okay, I want to look at, and you can have different preset locations if you want. So if I choose my VST sound, I could actually come right over here to factory content. And then if I wanted to go to, we could see kind of all of our different Steinberg content here. So if I wanted to look for very specifically for different content, we could just kind of come here and say, okay, let's go to our Groove Agent for common content. And I could say, let's find electronic kits. Now, I could actually type in kind of a filter name here. So I could say snare. And at this point, we could have it look through all of the various folders. So as we kind of play back this pattern, I could now just double click, go to a different folder. Like this, and so as we wanted to play like this particular pattern here, And let me just put this into a loop here so we can hear it. And we'll go ahead and just kind of mute. So this way you could just kind of audition different snares. Now you could also just kind of navigate down and hit enter and load in your different samples. So you navigate down using your arrows. So it makes it kind of very easy way to kind of jump and try out different ideas and try out different sounds for that. So that's an easy way of kind of auditioning multiple, to take a pattern and try out different snare drums very easily. So if you go to within the instrument pad set, go to load, and then go to the browser, and you could direct it anywhere in your hard drive and just load up various samples. And if you have the name of the samples, you can actually just kind of type it in here. So you could find snares or claps or kicks or hats or cymbal crashes, whatever sound you're kind of looking for. All right, so we'll move on to, we had a question from Jake about using, I think it was a Zoom R24 recorder, and kind of using some of the transport as well as some of the MIDI control settings. So what we want to do is probably, a lot of times we can set up any audio interface within Cubase by going to your device menu, to the device setup, and then you'll see the VST audio system here. And as you can see, I'm just kind of using a UR44 interface, but we could select any audio interface driver that we currently have selected there. So as we do that, we can basically choose where the audio is coming in and out of. So that's, I think Jake said that he had that kind of functioning correctly. But it may be that we have some of the transport controls as well as some of the MIDI pads not functioning correctly. So if we come over here to the plus sign, we could add remote controls. So if I wanted to see different controllers here, a lot of these controls will kind of emulate a Mackie control. I'm not totally familiar with the R24. But if you wanted to, you could probably set it up as a Mackie control. And then once you have the Mackie control set up, you could just choose what MIDI input and output ports are set for that device for the control. Once the correct MIDI input and output ports have been defined here, you should be able to just kind of hit OK and then have that functionality working. Sometimes the companies may give you a script to do this as well. A lot of times it kind of works as a Mackie control is a pretty common industry format for that. Now something else that you could do is if it doesn't show up as a Mackie control, you could come right over here and go to the generic remote. And then here you have a Midi Learn function. So you could say, I want this controller, and you could actually just kind of hit the knob, and we could say we want it to control not necessarily our VST mixer, but we could say transport, and then I want this to be my device, and I want that to be my start menu, or I want to select transport here, choose your device, and then again you could say I want this to be stop, record, fast forward, whatever. Now as you do this, you should also see kind of your MIDI port setup. So I believe that the Zoom has like little drum pads on it as well, if memory serves correctly, and you should see those ports activated directly here as well. So one of the things is also you could have those MIDI input ports show up in what we call in all MIDI ports. So if you come here to a particular MIDI channel, you could set it to all MIDI input ports, and at that point, that would automatically take any MIDI message that's coming in. Now, if you've ever run into a situation where when you hit like the transport keys on a MIDI controller and you're hearing weird drum sounds or different unexpected sounds, as if they were playing MIDI notes, what you'd want to do is to go here to device setup, and when you see that MIDI port, just to simply uncheck in all MIDI input ports. And that way it'll only be defined for your generic remote or for other remote controls like a Mackie control. So probably my guess is for Jake that would automatically kind of work directly with a Mackie control setup, but I'm not 100% certain. But if not, you could have it work as a generic remote. All right, I see a question from Sir Robert about if we have a particular track set up. Let me load up a different project here. All right, so I'm seeing a couple comments from Jake here before we move on. You said in Elements 7.5 is generic and 7.5 Mackie references a piece of hardware. So you can use a generic remote, but also a lot of the devices for transport work as a Mackie controller, and it's not necessarily a dedicated Mackie piece of hardware, but more of a control system, like a kind of almost an operating system for a controller. So multiple controllers kind of use the Mackie specification to be able to control programs like Cubase. So, all right. So getting back to Sir Robert's question about wanting, we'll just make sure I'm reading this correctly. All right, and with all of my different stuff going on, I'm going to reboot my Cubase here really quickly. Give me just 1 second. Sorry about this. About 10 unnecessary programs going on in the background. So I'm just going to restart my Cubase. All right, so we could go back and review a couple of the questions here. We had a question from Eclipse Sound if we have Omnisphere. I don't currently have it installed on. I don't have it installed on this computer. But if you have a quick question on it, I might be able to help you. I've worked a little bit with it, but I don't have it actually installed on this computer. All right, so if you find yourself that you have a particular track and all the settings are kind of really dialed in and everything is perfect, let's say if I wanted to go to a particular track here in this project, and I want to be able to use that across multiple projects, we could do something called a track preset. So if I open up this particular track, and I can see, let's say I have a couple, like an insert effect, and let's say I have some EQ and maybe my channel strip settings. And I wanted to be able to kind of take this particular track and all of these settings and open it up into a completely different project. All you'd have to do is to literally right click on a particular track, and then you could say save track preset. So we're going to call this Sir Robert Guitar. So now if I have a new project, I could actually add an audio track, and then if you wanted to, you could browse for presets here, and I could say let's go to Sir Robert Guitar. So if you actually click on browse, you could type in the name here in the media bay. You can double click, and all the settings would automatically be carried over. So if I wanted to now open that up, my EQ, my insert effects, volume, and panning have all been carried over. So that way you can kind of build up and kind of a whole set of presets for your particular studio if you want to. And what's really handy for that is, like, if you have a studio drum kit, you could also do that for multiple tracks. So you could have like your entire studio drum kit saved as one single track preset, or you could have just a studio piano or different studio guitars, or just your vocal chain, or if you're working with different artists, you know that you have to set up the mic and do a low pass filter or whatever. You could just simply have all those things set up and stored as a track preset. So it kind of makes working with your being able to find your processing and have all the projects kind of pop up very, very fast. So I hope that answers your questions, Robert. If you need any more clarification, just feel free to comment in the comments field. All right, so I'm seeing the question from Eclipse Audio about Omnisphere timbers, and when you put effects inserts on a particular separate channel, I hear effects on all channels, even when they're split, and we can show how to set this up properly. One of the things with using some of the virtual instruments that may be causing this, and I'm not sure in your particular scenarios, if we add a VST instrument, we could have kind of track instruments or rack instruments. And it used to be, prior to Cubase 7.5, that the track instruments were kind of very fast, but limited to only a stereo output and being monotimbral. With 7.5, it's kind of been consolidated so that a rack instrument and a track instrument don't have those limitations. So you can have multiple outputs in the mixer, as well as multiple MIDI channels, so it could be multi-timbral. So if I have a multi-timbral synth, something like Halion Sonic SE, so now when I come right here, we have a multi-timbral instrument, and really what you'd need to do is you could do this a couple ways. One is if you click on this icon right here, by default it'll show up being just a stereo output into your mix engine. Now you can come directly here from the instrument rack itself, and now you could activate all the outputs, and we can see these just get added directly here as well. So if I just say If we just have our main stereo out, we just have our main stereo output here. And now we can see all of our different outputs there. Now, if I've added a multi-timbral instrument, as if I started off with an instrument track, so let's say if I add the Hallian Sonic SE, and we now have this as an instrument track. If we go just to on the inspector here, we can now click and we can activate all the outputs, and this works not only for Hallian Sonic but any VST instrument that has multiple outputs. And now you could at that point do further effect processing on output 2 that's independent from output 3 and 4 and up through 16 or however many outputs your particular synth has. One of the reasons why they kind of initially limited it to just having a stereo output is because a lot of people would have instruments that had hundreds of outputs, and previously it would automatically, people would open up their mixer, they'd open up a sampler, and they'd have 256 outputs, and they couldn't find anything. So now you can kind of dynamically allocate the outputs. So I would try that Eclipse Sound and see if that does a trick for you. So if it's done with an instrument track, you could do it from the inspector, or the instrument rack, you could do it directly from the actual instrument rack itself, and that's accessed by going to your devices, to your VST instruments, or hitting F11, and you could also just kind of activate them all right here or from the inspector. So if you give that a try, I think that will probably do the trick for you. All right, so I'm just reading through a couple of the questions. Okay, so I'm reading Chris's question. Just kind of read through a couple of the threads here. So Chris, if you want to kind of maybe type some more of your questions. I guess you're getting a message that says not enough virtual memory to preload samples for playback. Reduce the preload time or unload plugins that are not used to free memory. You sometimes see this with different sample playback engines. So different plugins that some of them will load up the samples in memory, and some will load the samples, just the initial attacks of the samples before, like in memory, and stream the rest of the samples from your hard disk. So the advantage of the streaming is you can have much larger samples, and only generally like the initial attack of the samples is actually loaded into the computer's memory. That makes the ability to have larger samples a lot more viable. So if you have different instruments, I'll just load up. Even I think Groove Agent allows you to kind of set this, but a lot of them, even in kind of like Hallian 5, if we open up this is our sampler. This is like the first VST streaming sampler. So often you may see a page like this, depending on the actual plugin, it's going to be a little different, and it's often kind of in an options page. So you could actually see kind of the balance here. between how much is being loaded into RAM versus disk. So obviously with 64-bit, that gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility to load up larger samples. Used to be that 32-bit operating systems, depending on your operating system, could be limited to 2 gigabyte or 4 gigabyte, and that could, could be a real problem loading up large sample libraries. But now with 64-bit, you kind of basically have access to significantly more memory. I think some other boards are supporting up to 128 gigs of memory. But this way you could kind of allocate your balance here of how much. So if I had more RAM, I might want to load the samples into RAM as opposed to streaming them from hard disk, or if I was limited on a RAM. So often you'd see kind of this balance on a streaming settings and how much of it is going to be allocated towards that particular instrument. So you could actually pick how much of that instrument is being used for the RAM versus being streamed directly from the hard disk. So I think that answers your question, Chris. If not, just go ahead and kind of enter in the comments field, and we'll be able to do that. All right, so let's say if you want to do this within Groove Agent, I think reading Chris's comments, we'll just kind of load up Groove Agent here. So we'll go to drums. And we'll take a look at where the settings are in Groove Agent. So again, if you go to options, here you kind of see this maximum preload. So you could kind of set how much of that is being allocated for your preload. So again, that's under the options menu. And if you don't really have a lot of memory, memory today is like kind of very, very inexpensive. So you kind of load up in as much memory as you can. And it really can help with a lot of virtual instruments. And sometimes, if you load up, because your operating system is going to take a certain amount of memory as well as, your program. And then if you load up a lot of large drum samples, if you're trying to load up, 6 gigs of drum samples, you might just want to adjust that setting so that you can kind of have it tailored for your particular system. But I think that'll help you with that. Now, while we're on Groove Agent, I think we had a question about recording multiple tracks in Groove Agent on a particular on a particular project, like where we could have multiple agents going on simultaneously. So we'll take a look at that. I think it's for Richard, I believe. I might be mistaken. All right. So one of the things that's very powerful about Groove Agent is the fact that you can actually come directly here, and we have kind of instrument patterns as well as instrument pads as well as pattern pads. So if I wanted to just do like a little bit of recording, I could actually just kind of hit the transport bar here, and we see that these pads here respond to MIDI notes. So what I could do is, in essence, just place this into record and record a MIDI message. So now I'll start a pattern. If I want to do a different pattern, I hit a different MIDI note. Or drum fill. And right back to a pattern, let's say. So what I've done is I've actually sequenced these different events here that will be the different patterns. And the same principle applies if we wanted to do kind of multiple agents. So I'm going to open up some tracks here that will have 4 agents combined. So we'll just load up a different instance of Groove Agent here. Now, what's interesting is you have the different pattern pads are kind of global for each of the different agents. So in this agent here, I have just the acoustic agent on this pattern. And this pattern, I have the acoustic agent and the percussion agent. And this one I have the electronic beat agent. And this one I have all 4 agents playing. So I could send one MIDI note, and this will actually kind of trigger the different patterns. Now, how you could kind of visualize which patterns and are playing depending on a particular MIDI note is to, when you have the pattern layer selected here, if you go to the overview, at this point you could see all the different patterns. So if I come right here, I can see the patterns that are available for this pattern bank. So we have 8 banks of 16 pads. So each of the pads here can have, each of these, we have 16 different patterns per bank and 8 banks. So if I come here, we could actually kind of pick and choose and say, okay, at this time I don't want the percussion pattern or beat agent 4 to play, but I want my acoustic kit and this beat agent. So we see these horizontal columns here, and these represent the different what patterns are playing. Now, if you wanted to really kind of just change the order, you can just drag and drop the patterns just like that. So you can mix and match any of the different patterns just that easily. So when you do this, especially for live use, it's really handy. You can now just kind of place this into record. And we'll start off with just the acoustic agent here. And we'll move this down just a little bit. And now we'll add the percussion. And now with the beat agent. And now we'll add the Marching Madness beat agent with it. And then right back to our first pattern. So now if I wanted to just play that back, what we're doing is in essence triggering the patterns of all these different patterns across the multiple beat agents. So come here, we have just our solo agent. So that way you could kind of work all 4 agents simultaneously. So you can kind of drag and drop and change the patterns here. And then if you wanted to save that as a multi-preset, all you'd have to do is, you could just kind of come right here. And once you have that multi-program, you could save that and then call that up and have everything kind of set up for you so that it'll be the same way every single time you do that. So I hope that answers the question. I believe it was Richard that asked a question about recording multiple drum patterns. All right. Now we had a question that was sent in advance. Someone that wanted to just actually record, have a click track that was on as audio. So we have kind of the Cubase click track here. that we could activate, and we probably all know and kind of love this sound. So if we wanted to actually have a different click track, a lot of times people may want something kind of very simple. So there's not a real convenient way to kind of get this particular click track as an audio file directly into the program. One thing that a lot of people end up doing is just taking a very simple drum beat, and they find it to be a little more kind of inspiring to play with as opposed to a click track for musicians. Now, if I wanted to take just this pattern, I could go to the edit here, and we'll go to the particular agent, and you could actually just kind of click right here if you wanted to edit the MIDI pattern. At this point, once you kind of click on this kind of migration tool, this little icon right here, this will turn into MIDI, and you could actually just kind of change the particular pattern here. But once you have a pattern, what a lot of people end up doing is just simply dragging that particular pattern like this into our timeline. And this way you have, let's say you have like a particular, and you can just do it directly from right there. And this way you can have a particular drum pattern, like a really basic drum pattern as a click track. Now, a good way to kind of have, and this will, generally if it's MIDI, it's automatically going to conform to musical time. And if you wanted to kind of drag it, there's a number of different ways to do this very quickly within Cubase. So if I wanted to just hit Control D or Command D on Mac, you could do that. My favorite way that makes me feel really cool is if you hold down the Alt key and kind of go to the very bottom here, you'll see that this object selection tool, when you hold down the Alt key and go to the lower right hand corner, turns into a pencil tool. Now you could just drag, if I do it correctly this time, you could just drag those events and copy the events. So that way you could say, okay, I don't want the click track to show up at measure 37 through 41. So they're just MIDI events, and these MIDI events could be rendered as audio very easily as well. So that way you could have kind of an audio click track. So I know a lot of people just have a particular drum pattern, a really basic drum pattern, or make even, like rim shots if they wanted to, and just kind of use that as the click, and that way it could kind of be incorporated directly in the timeline, and you could do routing of the virtual instrument to different headphone mixes if you wanted to as well. So it's not, it's kind of a workaround to be able to get some of the functionality, but it will definitely kind of work to get stuff going. All right, we're going to look through any other quick questions that have come in. We have a couple more that were kind of sent in advance. I'm going to open up and take a look at those, and we'll answer those. So I see a question from Jake about recommended reading on MIDI usage that can help get a better understanding of how it interfaces with Cubase. So, I mean, Cubase can kind of do anything with MIDI information. I don't know of a book kind of that I could recommend, but MIDI is kind of a language that was originally used to kind of play different instruments from different manufacturers, and companies like Steinberg said, okay, we could capture that information and be able to manipulate it like a word processor. And that's what kind of MIDI sequencing is, and it also allows you to communicate with different hardware pieces, and that's why it's often used for remote control or MIDI time code. So it's a bit of a broad question, but think of it as a communication protocol or a language to allow you to kind of have different communications going on. So, all right. Let me just go look up some of the questions that were sent in advance. And if you guys have any particular questions that you want to go over, please feel free to kind of enter them in. I think we had a notation question. All right. So we had a question on some of the notation inside of Cubase about specifically with entering scores. So we'll go ahead and open up a project that has some MIDI in it. So I see Richard had a quick question on about Cubase 7 stopped working. A problem occurred in the program that caused it, and about closing the program. If you wanted to send that error message to our customer solutions, sometimes it could be caused by different hardware plugins. Once in a while, the program will misbehave. It did for me tonight, but generally, it's been a pretty solid program. But if you wanted to send that to our if you go to your Steinberg, my Steinberg account, you could send that message. There's often an error message, and you could send that to in the support request form, and they could probably help you out in more detail with that. All right. So when we look at kind of notation, one of the cool things that Cubase does really well with notation, and you may run into different scenarios where MIDI notes are actually perhaps played a little bit ahead of the beat or behind the beat, depending on different performances. But one of the things that we want to do is we have a concept. If I want to take a look at my MIDI data here, we could actually kind of see the MIDI data laid out for us. And a lot of very powerful notation and scoring features are kind of found, and options are found in this little setup, the staff settings. And a real easy way of getting the staff settings is you could just simply double click to the left here. And this will open up your score settings. So here, if you wanted to set the key of your particular song, like this one's in the key of G. You could also set, if you want it to be a polyphonic, like a grand staff where it's split at a particular note, we could do that as well. Now, one of the powerful things you have is a display quantization. So a lot of times if someone is played a little bit ahead of the beat or behind the beat, you may notice that sometimes the notation doesn't look very accurate. So if you actually come here, you could actually do a display quantize. So this doesn't actually move the notes, but what it does is it kind of quantizes only the display of the MIDI notes. So you can see 16th notes will be, let's say, our smallest, and maybe an 8th note rest, and you'll have some other kind of interpretive flags here. I usually tend to kind of check these for kind of like if something was played in. Now the question we had was working with the lyrics. So if you wanted to come here, you could actually go to your inspector. So you have kind of two different inspector tabs, and one of them would allow you to work with different symbols, and one of them would be lyrics. So we could enter text in here. So if you want to put like different performance notes, but with lyrics, we could actually have these tied to the particular note. So if I just wanted to actually kind of type in, you could hit the tab key, and that will take you to the next note. And what's interesting about that is as we move the events here, we have what we call an object select, kind of a display tool. So if I wanted to move a particular note, we can have that lyric automatically tied with it. So even if I wanted to do something like indent the first line, I could just drag that and be able to take this, and at that point have those lyrics automatically tied with that note. So even if as I move that note visually, it doesn't change its value rhythmically. So these lyrics can be printed out just that easily. Now, one of the comments in the question was that some of the lyrics turn red and that they don't print out. I haven't really come across that, but it could be that when we go to the scores menu, you could actually kind of, I think if we go into it might be under the settings page, and if you go to text, I believe that you could actually kind of colorize the different text settings here, so you can have different font options. So make sure that directly in here that the text isn't colorized, and maybe for some reason that isn't printing out, but that should allow you to see all the different lyrics that have been entered in, and those will automatically be tied again directly with the note itself. All right, so we'll see if you guys have other questions. We could show a couple of other things. We'll see. I'm going to go back and scroll through, see if we have questions that I've missed. And feel free to ask. It could be on Wavelab, it could be Nuendo, it could be on any Steinberg product. I'm just going to scroll back, make sure I didn't miss questions here. So I'm just reviewing some of the questions, make sure I didn't miss any. Okay, with the question regarding about Cubase Crashing from Richard 777, one of the things that you might need to do if you have the latest, I think it's I haven't fully read up on this, but the latest Cubase 7.5.3 update, I think there was an error, like a conflict with Internet Explorer on Windows. I could be mistaken as I do this, but you might want to try to disable the hub. So if you go to your file menu, and this could be done in the preferences. So if you go to file menu to preferences, and I believe it's under general. So let me just so we'll go to the General tab, and then you can say the Use Steinberg Hub directly here. Try to uncheck that, hit Apply, and then restart the program. And I think that will probably get it working for you. So again, try to just temporarily disable the Steinberg hub, especially if you've and I think that should probably help out with you. I know the guys are kind of working on a solution for that. But give that a try, Richard, and we'll see if that kind of does the trick for you. And we had another question that was emailed in about using the Cubase in conjunction with like a project that didn't have a specific audio tempo recorded with it. So I'll just open up another project here and we'll kind of show you something that's kind of a cool thing to do. All right, so a lot of times when you're working with different musicians, they may not actually record with a click track. And what that's could be sometimes difficult to have different drum beats or do editing because there's no real correlation to the grid. So if we have kind of a freely recorded piece of music, let's say we'll take a listen to this example here.
Turning Japanese, I think. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And if I wanted to turn the click track on, and we'll solo, let's say, a mandolin part. So there's no real correlation going on with the click track and that mandolin part. So what I could do is just simply select the track, the event itself, go to your project menu, and Cubase has automatic tempo detection. So I'll click on Analyze here. And what that's done now is it's automatically created a tempo map based on the original audio performance. And often you could use like drum parts, but this particular track is kind of more acoustic guitar and like mandolin based for kind of the rhythmic structure. So we have a tempo track, and we see that tempo track is kind of fluctuating, and it gives you a time signature track that's automatically created as well. And we'll just kind of zoom in here. And it gives us a meter of 1/4 because we don't assume that all of the music is in 4/4 time. So we come here.
Turning Japanese, I think.
I think we actually get a count in.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so we'll just come here and set this now to
2, 1.
So right there at that beat, I'm just going to make sure that my snap is turned on by hitting the J key. So when I enter in a value, that's going to snap to the bar. And what we want to do now is put in our 4/4 bar right there. So as we listen to this, we'll now have the tempo map.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So now we have a perfect tempo map of the performance. Now, if we wanted the musicians to actually play, so if I wanted to add MIDI drums or something like Groove Agent, it would be no problem to kind of add that to the existing acoustic performance that wasn't recorded to a click, because now we have that correlation to the bar and beat of the performance. So many times what I see engineers do is actually make the musicians kind of sacrifice the feel and integrity of the particular track so that they can do editing easily or more easily after the fact. So if I wanted to select all the events in the project now, one of the great things you could do is if you go to the audio menu to advanced, we can now go to set definition from tempo. And then we could do this, and what this will do is basically apply the metadata of all the tempo changes into the particular project. So I'll hit OK, And once I've done that, we can now, whatever tempo we enter in, all the tracks will just automatically follow the tempo. So I can see my original tempo here. If I hit 145, all the tracks will just speed up, or 156. Or if I wanted to be 100 beats a minute. Now, if I wanted to take the original tempo, so we could take the tempo and kind of take a performance that was maybe fluctuating a little too much in tempo for someone's liking and be able to kind of regulate that. Or if you wanted to, a lot of times people may want to actually make a track breathe a little bit and change the tempo. So if I come here, you could actually select the tempo range. Or if you wanted to now even just kind of draw in some different tempo information, we could just kind of draw in tempo changes here. So now as we do this, let me just turn my snap off, and we can do a little finer resolution. Then we go right back to our original tempo. So this way you could take kind of any performance, and if you wanted to like do a remix and add different drum loops or something like groove agents on top of it, or if you wanted to actually get to the point where you wanted to kind of regulate the particular tempo to kind of make it a little less like fewer fluctuations. It's very, very easy to kind of do with the audio warp technology. So it's a very easy and powerful thing to do. So you see a couple more questions coming in. So we have a question. When will they bring out the next version of Cubase 8? Generally, they'll announce it when it's ready. So I'm sure someone's always working on future versions of Cubase, but there hasn't been any date specified for that. But I'm sure developers are always constantly working on new exciting things. And also from Jake about setting the MIDI in the info device setup. Generally, you don't have to worry about it as long as you see kind of the MIDI port. So if you have a particular MIDI track, if you want to make sure that that Cubase is seeing, as long as the operating system is seeing the MIDI device, and you could check if your MIDI device is visible. If you come here on a MIDI track, you can see kind of all of your inputs, and you will see all of your different all your different input ports listed directly here. So this way you could actually just kind of see what devices are physically visible in the operating system. But if it's being seen by the operating system in Windows or OS X, you don't really have to set it up. So no worries there. I remember one question we had from the earlier, the first Google Hangout page where the audio wasn't working. So at that point, someone was asking about using the CMCs, but they only had like 2 USB ports, if I remember the question correctly, just from memory. So, if you have the CMC controllers, they're kind of USB bus powered, and there's kind of 6 modular controllers. So really all you need to do is to connect them to a powered hub. So depending on the computer, some computer USB ports will be higher, like a higher voltage or higher power than others. So I've run all 6 just off of one USB port. But sometimes the Macs don't have the highest powered USB ports. So just having a powered hub, one that kind of plugs into the wall, then you could run all the CMCs and other devices. So I've run 6 CMCs, my audio interface, all from one powered hub, and my e-licenser dongle, and my wireless mouse, all on one single powered USB hub without any bandwidth issues. So, all right, I'll go through some of the questions. We had another question that came in, but we'll see if there's any questions you guys have. Make sure I'm not missing stuff. All right, so we had one question about how to kind of easily replace drum samples. So, like, a lot of times you may get into different situations where maybe you want to kind of change or kind of beef up a particular drum sound, especially if you're working with, different types of, if you're mixing a project that perhaps you weren't fortunate enough to track, and then all of a sudden it's, you kind of feel like you're kind of have to kind of work with particular things. So if I wanted to come here, let me just find a project here. We'll show you how you could kind of do, and you could also buy all sorts of extensive kind of drum replacement software that works as VST plugins inside of Cubase. But one of the great things is you could do a lot just kind of with the different tools. So if I wanted to come here, I could have a copy of Groove Agent open, and I'm going to select that track. And let's say on this kit, it was just kind of a standard pop rock kit. And let's listen to our tracks here, and then we'll look. So we're going to have looks like 3 kicks, 2 snare tracks. So as we're doing this, if we want the drums kind of beefed up, like the kick and snare especially. So, it's a fine recording, but if we want it to kind of have it in the MIDI domain as well from the audio recording, I'm going to leave this track selected. We could double click on our kick track. And as we do this, we're going to go to our hit points. And then we're going to just kind of have it automatically choose to edit hit points, and we could adjust the threshold here. Now, why we adjust the threshold is when you have a live drum recording specifically, you often have tracks that are bleeding through. So if I wanted to just kind of play back a particular track, I could just, let's say we just solo this kick track. And we turn the volume up. You can hear some of the hi-hats bleeding through. And you can hear the snare. So I don't necessarily want to include all those things. So I'm going to just set my threshold so that it doesn't include the snare or the hi-hat bleeding through. And then within the hit point tabs, we have something called Create MIDI Notes. So I'm going to click on that, and we could retain the original dynamic velocity. And I want it to be a pitch of C1 because that's where my kick is here. So we'll change that to C1. And since we have that track selected with this Groove Agent loaded up, I'll just hit OK. And now as I play back the particular project, and let me just select the entire range here. Sorry about that. So now I have the original kicks triggering the sample here. And if I wanted to mute those kicks, so now you have the kicks and the original audio and the samples. And I want to do the same concept with the snare. You can now come here and again adjust your threshold, edit the MIDI notes, put it onto the first selected track, or you can make a new MIDI track or hit OK. So I'll mute the original kicks and snares. So even if you want to just rewind here a little bit. And what's cool about this is now you could actually kind of tune the kick. Or the snare. And then you could run it through all of its original effect processing. So you could take kind of the original feel of the tracks and be able to augment it just in a matter of seconds. And just really kind of have a, you know, a great instant fix for a lot of kind of badly recorded drum parts. And what's really interesting is you could actually, if you have particular drum samples that you really like if the drummer is actually kind of hit the kick drum like once magically, we could grab the range selection tool and I could select just that one magic kick drum hit onto 3 different microphones. And then I could just drag from my project window directly onto a pad here, and this will put all 3 samples onto the single pad. And if I wanted to just simply layer those, so now I could take like 3 samples and at that point, and you could kind of, okay, I wanted to start right here for that layer, and I wanted to start this layer right here. So you could just easily just drag and drop the existing audio and then be able to kind of tune it, tweak it, however you see fit. So kind of using the create MIDI notes is very powerful. And again, if you have a drummer that's come in, you could actually kind of very easily kind of make drum samples from their material. So really cool feature. All right, so I see a comment from Ricardo Martins. First time, I'm glad you get to watch this live. You should come back to Cubase. You shouldn't have to miss it. So you don't have to use Ableton. You could just kind of jump right back into Cubase 7. It's really incredibly comprehensive and fast. So I think you guys would like it. We'll see if there's any more questions. I think we got through most of the questions. I think maybe we have one more, but if you guys have questions, anything you've seen, just let me know. So we have a little bit of a buffer here. Sometimes there's about a minute of what I say until you guys actually hear it. So we'll just hang out for a second, let the buffer kind of catch up. All right, so we're just kind of letting the buffer catch up. So we'll see if there's any more questions that come in. Does this this is the first time we've kind of done in the Google Hangout at for I guess 7 o'clock West Coast time? Has that been helpful to some people? Let me know if that time works better, or the 7 o'clock Eastern time. We want to make sure that everyone's kind of jumping on, is able to kind of watch it. This is always available offline afterwards as well. So once you kind of watched it, if you missed it live, you could always watch it online after, and kind of feel free to send in questions. We'll see if there's any more questions that come up. All right, I think the last question that we had emailed in is on exporting audio mixdown with to MP3 files. So when you come here, we can do export audio mixdown, and if we wanted to take like your stereo mix and send it as an MP3 file, we could just, instead of choosing the file format as WAV, we can choose MPEG layer 1.3. Now the question was, will it automatically kind of go down if you have a 32-bit or 24-bit file? Will it kind of automatically turn into a 16-bit file for the MP3? I believe that it does. I could be mistaken, but I think that most of the normal codec, kind of the compression algorithms that or the different sizes that people generally use will be 16-bit. So I don't believe it's going to be the high resolution 24-bit or 32-bit that's going to kind of take a 16-bit file and kind of work from there. So I don't think you have to do anything special. If your project is in 32-bit or 24-bit, it would just automatically render it to the MP3 file in that particular bit depth to deliver to friends. All right. So we're going to just see if any more questions come in. All right. Well, it's great to have someone from Portugal watching live. So at 4:42 a.m. Well, your dedication is good. So yeah, you should definitely get Cubase. You'll be able to have fun working late at night. So we'll see if there's any more questions. We'll wait just a couple minutes. If not, we'll just kind of go ahead and wrap up. And for future Hangouts, we'll probably try to do maybe 2 in October. If you have particular questions or topics, if you go to the youtube.com/clubcubase, you can feel free to kind of send a message and have all the topics sent in advance. You could do that, or you could just kind of go online and we'll try to get through all the questions. I'm just going to make sure I'm not missing any questions that came in. I'm just going to go back and review through all the comments here real quick. But if you have any particular topics, and let me know if this time works better for you, or if it doesn't matter, if most of you watch it offline or watching it live. Just let me know if this works. I'm staying up kind of late on my end to do it, not as late as in Portugal, but we just want to make sure that we're not missing people on the West Coast if it's kind of like a 4 o'clock start time for them. So let us know your thoughts on that. Going through the comments, I don't see any topics or questions that I missed. right, just if not, we'll wrap up in a minute here. We'll just see if anyone else has any last minute questions. All right, we'll wait one more minute and see if there's any other topics. All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank you guys for coming out for the Google Hangout. Hope you guys found it useful. And again, if you have questions, you could watch this afterwards, or if you wanted to actually get to the point where, if you have questions, you could send them in advance. Or see if there's... I see a question from Ricardo. The main differences between Cubase 3 and 7, it's probably about 1,000 features. Let me see if I can do just a quick kind of Cubase 4 added a whole new suite of plugins and Media Bay, and so you could actually kind of organize all of your different sounds. Cubase 5 added Very Audio, which is kind of vocal tuning, very much kind of like off, integrated vocal tuning, kind of graphic vocal tuning like you would a MIDI editor. It added Groove Agent 1 drum machine, which you kind of seen the later version of Groove Agent SE. The VST amp rack that was, I think that came in with, and Cubase 5 also added something called VST expression, so you could do kind of sample management articulations. Cubase 6 added like a multi-track drum quantizing, so you could kind of tighten up multi-track drum performances with phase accuracy, and also added the VST amp rack, some new comping features, and also the ability to have like what we call note expression. So you could actually have kind of within the same MIDI channel the capability of having kind of multiple MIDI controllers like pitch bend and panning and volume on the same MIDI channel. Cubase 7 added a brand new mix console, as well as with the 7.5, all sorts of track versions for kind of easily doing multi-track comping. Some new effects like the Loop Mash FX, but we brought back Magneto. In addition to that, the Revelation, which is a phenomenal reverb. So kind of a whole slew of new features, but there's hundreds and hundreds of little things and new plugins and new sounds that really kind of made a huge difference between Cubase 3 and 7. So it's going to be like a really, jumping up like significantly in feature sets. But the cool thing is, like, pretty much most of the stuff of what you see in Cubase 3 is still applicable in Cubase 7. So even like your audio warp, your play order track, your the arranger track, those are all still in the later version. And so just kind of more and better. So probably the biggest significant difference would be initially that you'd run into is the mix console, but it's once you kind of get into it, it's incredibly powerful. So there's a lot of significant differences between Cubase 3 and 7. So it's a pretty phenomenal upgrade for you to take advantage of. And you could also kind of check out, there's a trial version that you could download as well. So, you could try that and run the trial version on your Cubase SX3 license. So. Let's see if there's any other last minute questions. If not, we could wrap up. right, so we'll see if there are any more questions. We'll just wrap it up here. We'll see if any kind of sneak in here. All right, we'd like to thank everyone for your time. Hope everyone found this useful. And again, if you want to subscribe to the channel, you can go to either the official Steinberg channel at youtube.com/Steinberg Software or to youtube.com/Club Cubase. If you have any questions or topics you want covered in future Hangouts, please just feel free to leave a message on the youtube.com/Club Cubase, and we'll be happy to go over those. Thank you very much.